Welcome to today's episode of the AfricaCann journey. Today's guest is Jordan Curl. Jordan is an international educator, advocate, and independent consultant to governments and corporations for the medical and recreational cannabis industries and a U.S. Marine Corps Infantry veteran. Currently, Jordan is stationed and working towards legalization efforts in the country of eSwatini with the group iCAN, Swazi Cannabis. Since 2019, Jordan has been the production and extraction consultant for iCAN, Israel Cannabis, and within the scope of this post, Jordan has consulted on best practices and capital raising for cultivation, production, extraction, processing, retail operations, and cross-border trade across Western and Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Alongside this, Jordan also provides technical and broad consultancy for startups, market research, and due diligence services for companies and products seeking admission into emerging markets. Jordan, thanks for making time for this interview this afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. How about yourself?
I'm well too, under the circumstances, but I'm getting by. Okay, so I've given
Good to hear.
So I've given quite a broad introduction about your professional background. Maybe you can also just, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been working in cannabis for a very long time in general. After the military, it was just straight into cannabis, working in the medical side, and then I moved over to the recreational side, and then I kind of work on the international side. And so I've been in every kind of type of marketplace, from the creation of it to working in more formal regulated markets to emerging markets. I just have a grab bag of experience from, actually working with cannabis, growing it, extracting it, processing it, delivering it, selling it, all the way up to analyzing markets, doing reviews for investments, just basically now acting as a general cannabis consultant to show other people how to reach either markets or how to create large scale extraction and production facilities.
Okay. And right now you're still based in Swaziland, right?
Yes, ma'am. I kind of got locked down here during the start of Corona. I was supposed to be actually about to jump on a flight back to Israel. And then the lockdown started kind of happening. And so I had to make a decision. So do I lock down in Israel? Do I lock down in Cape Town? Do I lock down in Swaziland? And I decided to Swaziland seemed nice and cheap and exciting. And the cannabis was, I think, like 5 or 10 cents. And so for me, that was kind of the clincher. I ended up just staying here, been here for the last year. Things have been very interesting because the 2020 cannabis bill for legalization, as well as ways of legalizing the hemp industry, have come up, and I've got to act as one of the only foreign experts. I spoke in Parliament. I got to help a lot of the stakeholders. I've been also helping a lot of the indigenous growers and hustlers, if you want to call them, but I like to call them industry workers because I feel like a lot of the work they do is very hard and very difficult and very high risk, and they don't just get the respect and notoriety or acknowledgement that they truly should. I mean, my preference would be all cannabis workers would eventually unionize or work together in some cooperative form. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've been up here. I've been just kind of basically acting as a pro bono consultant because I get bored and I enjoy helping people. And also it's been really good just learning experience. I got to spend some time on a traditional agricultural farm for 4 months during lockdown. And then I got to also spend time getting very understanding how the cannabis market as well as cultivation works here in Swaziland. It's actually been crazy just because as I've been watching for the last year, apparently there's no time not to plant cannabis here. And then the seasons don't really matter. The weather doesn't matter. Everything's just kind of, you gotta hope for the blessings coming down, basically.
Wow, sounds very busy, but also very exciting. I particularly like the bit that the way you spoke about working with some of the local farmers. And, obviously, as Africans, we have a long history of growing cannabis. And what I want to maybe know from your perspective is, if, say, I've been growing or I'm looking to go into cannabis growing or cultivation, how can I transition from maybe, informally doing it in my backyard to, maybe commercializing my cannabis grow?
A lot of just, I would say that one of the best starts is just learning from other people or finding somebody that's already in the industry and finding a mentorship. And then also spending a lot of time on YouTube. And forums as well. There's a unending or infinite amount of information that you can get from different different mediums, right? Depending on what kind of learner you are. Some people like YouTube, some like Socratic methods, like learning on forums. Just absorb as much information in what you're most interested in, because a lot of people do get really distracted with cannabis because they're like, oh, this is so cool, I enjoy cannabis. But then when it comes to say they want to grow, or if they already grow and they're trying to move that over there, it's not going to be the same thing. Because as you go into commercial cannabis, things are becoming more regulated. They're expecting a level of professionalism. It's not like your normal growing at home. So you have to learn the normal business skills and some skill, like other skills that you need to incorporate to actually be accepted by the more business and corporate types. Because depending on if you're like a small scale grower, even today, the idea of growing to scale is actually very difficult and very hard to do, and not a lot of people have the experience in it. But before this, everybody that was growing on a small scale eventually moved up. It takes time and it takes education and it takes understanding multiple disciplines as well as how equipment works. But it's not impossible. Like you're not capped by anything other than yourself. If you choose, I know a lot of things that I could actually tell you about with very good detail. I might not be an expert on it, but because like cannabis has brought me into those different disciplines of education, I know a lot more than I did before. And so whether it be on the cultivation or on the extraction side, is just try to learn the job above, below you, as well as try to find like how the industry should actually work, right? So understanding testing, understanding regulations, understanding ISO 9001 and GMP practices, right? Because a lot of things people don't understand is there's a huge paperwork side to cannabis. And so knowing how to fill and write is actually a lot of what cannabis is now, because you're tracking data, you're trying to understand how you're doing it. If you were a small time grower, I would start by, or an extractor, I would say start by writing your own standard operating procedures. Basically, just start writing down everything that you're doing and tracking your data. So then it'll help you to not only understand your yields, but also your input that you're putting into there, right? So you can understand how much it ended up costing you per gram. If you're extractor, same thing, to weigh your stuff before you put it in, weigh it afterwards, see what your yields were, see what variables that you can change to increase your yields, right? And that's the same thing for the growth side. And then just experimentation. I mean, a lot of people like to read and understand. Theoretical information is great, but you really cannot beat putting your hands on the plant, right? So even if you're an extractor, that even if that means just trying a bunch of stuff and wasting a bunch of time and effort trying different things, read and learn. If you're a cultivator, if whether you believe in low stress training or high stress training or a sea of green or like basically like scrogging your plants, whatever you want to do, try that method. I mean, I grew I did a vertical coliseum grow once, right? And it takes a very long time because you have to grow your plants out for upwards of 2 to 3 months. But instead of having canopies of different cannabis, everything gets pushed through into a scrog net. And so all those like lower level, like LARP or not so good cannabis that we put towards extraction all hardens up and becomes the same as the top. I mean, it's not feasible to do that at a commercial scale, but somebody who's into craft cannabis, or maybe they've got limited space, that'd be a perfect answer or solution for that. But just going back to your general question, is just information. Like a lot, especially when you're selling yourself to a corporation or to a business or other entrepreneurs, have a CV, have references, and then know what you're talking about. But also don't forget that like chances are, if you've actually got hands-on or time on the plant, you're already miles ahead of most people, especially if you've done it successfully. A tent grow, a backyard grow, all that is more experience than you understand. And yeah, that's what I would say if you would like to transition from kind of that what you're already doing into the what we call the legal market.
Thank you. I think that's great advice, but I think some of the challenges that we deal with on this side of the world are, obviously, as you pointed out, the access to information on the internet. Information is out there, but as you know as well, the data costs are insane. So even that is already a barrier for most people that are hoping to get more information from YouTube and from other internet sources. But also with even with the current reforms we've seen and more countries exploring medicinal cannabis, some countries still haven't decriminalized it, right? So if you don't have a license and you don't have a privacy law to, protect you in those circumstances, how do you then have these plans on which you will practice and learn the very things that you've just described?
Basically, you have to break the law. The law is not correct. I mean, we look at the history of cannabis and why it's illegal. It's a racist, it's a colonialist history to begin with. Especially if you look to the reasons why cannabis was originally made illegal in the 1920s all the way up to like 1940s. A lot of it has to do with like American domestic or foreign policy around like federal aid, as well as like the narcotics treaties from the 1960s and 1970s. They're wrong. I mean, here's the thing: this prohibition is a weird blip in the history of the use of cannabis. We can look back at 1920s and 1910s, and we can see cannabis medicine that says cannabis tincture and cannabis extract. And yes, it's next to heroin cough drops and methamphetamine pills, but at the same time, this has always been a medicine since 10,000 BC. People have been using it for decades upon millennia. We don't know how far it actually goes back. We have an endocannabinoid system that was meant to receive cannabis. The laws are wrong. And I always tell people, never risk more than what you're willing to lose, but know your area, know your situation, find somebody. I mean, I've personally helped harvest plants in Palestine. There's people that don't believe that country exists. And if you've ever been there and you know how dangerous it is for cannabis, I mean, I had another American friend who got arrested because they got a friend high, and he got too high and got took to the hospital, and they came and arrested her for getting the guy high. That was a whole ordeal. This was all separate from that. This is months later, but I mean, the stuff grows everywhere, whether it be Russia, Turkmenistan, the Middle East, Southeast Asia. It grows everywhere. Just don't take risks more than you're willing to. And if you're wherever you're at allows for hemp, obviously grow hemp first. Grow something that constitutes that. Or better yet, if you're really seriously dedicated about it, take a trip. I actually, when I was really first getting my foot into the cultivation door of cannabis, I actually lived for 6 months in the state of Montana, but I was traveling to Washington State to get an education around the cultivation of cannabis. I mean, where there's a will, there's a way. A lot of this, just because you don't have your hands on and can't manage to, or if you don't want to legally, hire a consultant. There's lots of people all across the internet that all grow at home, everything from a tent to a room, that if you pay them, a little bit of money, they'll tell you everything they know. And there's qualified consultants, and there's people that don't know what they're doing, but you can do a lot of background research and then ask somebody for an hour of their time. Generally, a lot of potheads and people that really believe in the medical cannabis community, you'll find somebody that'll do it for free. I mean, I like doing it. Other people like sharing it, especially if you're from Southern Africa. There's lots of American growers that would love to have anybody go from South Africa or from any other African country go, yeah, this is what we're showing today, how to grow this, this, and this. If there's a platform or a podcaster or a videocaster or a vlogger that works in cannabis and you like them, send them a message on Twitter. Reach out. That's the genius of the internet, is that you can reach out and touch anybody and ask anybody questions. I really advise people to fix their CVs and then also really get on LinkedIn, because you can just literally reach out and touch some of these people that are just so ingrained in the cannabis industry. And some people are just, I've had very actually famous people in the cannabis industry respond to my messages on LinkedIn even before I was considered an international expert. Right? Because a lot of people grew up in the Socratic method of sharing this knowledge between each other. So if you come in a polite, respectful manner and you ask for somebody's time, 95% of it, they'll say no, or they'll be ignored, which is fine, but it's never going to hurt you to ask for more information. It's not and I know you said, data is limited, YouTube's limited. Finding friends, a friend of a friend of a friend, even if you have to write letters, you never know. Maybe you can, there's tons of criminals that are probably in jail for cannabis cultivation. I'm sure if they had a pen pal, you wrote to that person, you may find your new best friend. And that's I don't know what the cost of a stamp is in South Africa, but America, it's about 6 or 7 rand.
No, but also I like what you said about LinkedIn, because honestly, that's where I got probably one of my biggest breaks in my career so far. I think sometimes we can take for granted how easy it is, and what a gift social media is, and LinkedIn specifically, that you just inbox somebody, you introduce yourself. Obviously, your approach and the manner in which you approach individuals is also quite important. But I think that has definitely opened up the world so that we can all interact and gain advice from people operating in different spaces in the industry. And even though I can't necessarily condone breaking the law, I do remember a line from Jules from the from the Dacha couple, where he spoke of good people disobey bad laws, and along those lines, that's why I think I would be more inclined to encourage people to mobilize and to look at ways to push for reform of the cannabis laws so that they are more inclusive, and so that people can gain access to those things that you and I just spoke about. Because a lot of people have been growing, whether it's in the illicit market and so on, for many years. So the skills are there. So it's not like in commercializing the cannabis industry, you're starting at zero. A lot of Africans have agricultural skills and skills specifically linked to growing cannabis. It's just that, okay, how do we formalize it, and how do we not leave them out of this amazing industry that has opened up on the continent? So because of those barriers, I also wanted to get from your perspective, how do you see the industry going forward, particularly in Southern Africa, where there's still some of these large or huge barriers to entry into the commercial industry? How do you see that affecting the black market, the illicit market? And do you see them continuing to grow in parallel? For example, we've seen in Canada that the black market, the illicit market, has not been displaced by the legal market. What are your predictions about the African space?
It brings up a very interesting point about like South Africa and most of Southern Africa that I've seen, which is ganja or daga, cannabis, whatever you like to call it, is still stigmatized very heavily. Like whether even the older generation that like even if they've made money off cannabis, whether they like to admit it or not, they like you can be a police officer, you can be whoever, but if you can be a public servant, you can go clean up parks, but if you smoke daga, you're a bad person, right? And so a lot of that is a stigma we're still fighting. A lot of that carries over from like very conservative Christian ideals that were brought over through missionary work, and a lot of that also comes from like pre-colonialism and pre-apartheid or apartheid like laws. It's you see it very similar to in Eastern Europe that were former Soviet states, where they have a belief that if it's not from a pill bottle or a vodka bottle, it's a weakness, right? So cannabis is the same as heroin or meth when you go to Ukraine or you go to Russia, someplace like that. I think the way we change that, I think, is education, having people speak as professionally about cannabis as possible. How I think things are going to play out in South Africa, as far as with the illicit market, I think that stigma is going to cause a lot of problems. We've already started to see a couple of shops start to open up in the what we would call gray market area, as well as like people that are claiming to be completely legal. I've also seen licensed producers that are supposedly coming online, and I'm already seeing licensed producers, and not everywhere, but I think Southern Africa has a very rich history when it comes to corruption and bribery, and so I definitely think that because of that, it will keep a lot of people that would either normally be able to exceed or have access to the market are going to be kept out of it. Whether that's because of instilled corruption or not knowing the right people or whatever, a lot of people are just not, the way South Africa is going right now, there's not really a good regulatory framework. Technically, it's not even legal. Like high THC cannabis isn't even legal. It's just decriminalized. And hemp they're still figuring out the hemp rules at the moment, right? And so it's interesting because we've had this same situation happen before in other countries or in other states. I've seen it in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Oregon. Basically, there's a transition period between decriminalization and legalization, or usually after legalization, before the infrastructure is put in place. Like in Washington State, there was about a 2-year period because we decided to build a separate cannabis structure rather than just open the doors to the medical facilities like Colorado did. That ended up actually that left a 2-year gap or a year and a half ish gap before a shop opened and actual cannabis was put onto the shelves. Well, the law enforcement understood that, people have been smoking cannabis anyways. It's now decriminalized. They let any player enter the market. So a lot of the medical people really did start just selling to anybody over the age of 21. But after 2 years, after people shops started opening up, cannabis became more accessible. A lot of those brands and those companies that made a lot of money working technically in the, what you call the illegal or the gray market, they were told, hey, please stop doing what you're doing. And then a lot of people played the smart card and did that. They transitioned. They took what they had the brands that they'd already established inside the city of Seattle, and they flipped them. One of the largest delivery services ended up becoming one of the largest extraction companies in Seattle because they just pivoted from being a delivery service to selling their brand to an extraction company. A lot of these people that worked in the medical and technically kind of like semi-legal side of cannabis, they ended up being able to transition perfectly well into the legal market because they kind of saw the writing on the wall and started to figure out, oh, hey, we're not going to be able to do the same crazy stuff we used to be doing. So, and here's the thing is even in Washington State, up until I left in about 2017, there's still illegal cannabis. People don't go to the store. The people I know personally, they go to a guy. They have a guy that sells it at about 20% under the rate that you get at the stores. Now the stores are still they're almost there. They've been working kind of close. But I mean, if you come from South Seattle or, you're a true heavy smoker, the shops just don't work for you. And that also speaks to another thing, which is when shops open up and retail opens up and distribution opens up, not specifically export, you're going to be having a new influx of the market coming in, which is going to be your first-time users and your older users, basically. Most people over the age of 35 or people that were too scared to ever have a drug dealer or go to KFC to get a banky. So, and that includes a change in product, right? So whenever South Africa does start doing retail operations that are structured and legal on all forms, it's gonna be interesting because it's gonna be very high prices when it first happens, and a lot of people aren't gonna want to go to the store. I mean, I go to the store to buy one or two things just for market research, but yeah, unless it's usually like grandmas and grandpas, people want to go there to have selection. They want multiple strains. They're willing to pay a very high price for stuff that if you get off the street, you maybe pay 2 to 10 rand for, right? But that flower, since it's in a store, it's packaged and it comes from a proper secure supply chain. Yeah, now that 2 to 5 rand a gram is now 100 rand a gram, 150 rand a gram.
So just on that, I wanted to ask you, what differences have you seen in terms of quality from what you find typically in the illicit market versus, in a dispensary? I mean, obviously it differs according to which country and where you are. But just as a broad question, what do you find typically in the dispensary versus from the guy on the corner?
You get selection and you get quality. One of the biggest problems I think a lot of people had, or at least smaller shops and everything, well, things were still kind of on the medical side and gray market side in the States, was you had, depending on which shop you go to, you could have fluctuation quality, right? And price. You had to spend a lot of time kind of stitching it out. Open up in an industry where it's like, okay, you have to understand the margins, you have to make business relationships. It's like selling wine or alcohol, right? As a distributor. I worked for a specialized bubble hash company and where, I did sales as well as went to look at the flour that went into the pre-rolls and the hash. And so just it became an actual acquisitions job. I had to go, build a network and maintain relationships with a lot of these people. And when you go to your guy, you might have 1, 2, 3 selections, but the biggest problem you have is it'll take a while before even that happens. Currently, most people, when they buy cannabis, they don't really, the problem is quality assurance, selection, and then safety. because a lot of people, like, they don't have many options, or they're scared to get more than one option, right? And so the shops, they'll open up and they'll be very high priced. I've seen the shops that are they're working under the club model currently. You're looking at, minimum paying at least 100 rand, 65 to 100 rand a gram for their lowest grade, and then you're looking at paying 100 to 250 rand a gram for maybe their mid to high grade levels, and then extracts you're looking anywhere from 600 to 1200 rand a gram. Of course, the price will come down as like retail eventually does open it up and more shops open up, and people understand that you can't go after the same market you went after before, right? You can make yourself more presentable to that prior market, but it's not going to be the same market. Your average guy who really likes to smoke, who buys a banky, he'll keep going to his guy, he'll grow his own. Like, that's actually what's really put a lot of the South African markets into fluctuation since the decriminalization bill. Has been basically everybody that used to buy cannabis from a lot of the like retailers, the illicit retailers, are now just growing in their backyard. That's why you like prices all over the country for legal cannabis are just wild, because you have some people that are all the people that used to sell, or the people that would consume, they're just growing it themselves. So yeah, I think the illicit market will always be there. It's never leaving. Especially when you have countries like Swaziland right next door, you have Malawi, you have Tanzania. All these places are growing tons of cannabis, and usually it's either the export markets or the South African market is where they're trying to get it to. I don't see that changing anytime soon. You might see a drop in pricing, but that's not going to be for at least, I would say, 5-10 years maybe, until the government really figures out what it's doing. I mean, Colorado, Washington, California are all still, most of them are now like almost 10 years, some are 5, some are almost 10 years into their program, and they still cannot beat the illicit market. So it's just, it's proof to me that growers and everybody else should not be scared, especially up here in Swaziland, about the price dropping, just because you're going after a different target audience than you were before. So I say, just keep that in mind. Like it's not, a lot of things aren't going to change. It's just who's going to have access to those things is going to change, right? And then also the people are going to become more educated about extractions, vape pens, edibles. Right now, like Rick Simpson oil is kind of making its way through South Africa, from my understanding, right? And you've already got supply chain issues where people are cutting it with coconut oil, or they're using benzene, or they're using any weird compound rather than just ethanol and then filtering to make like a full spectrum oil. So again, it's going to take a while, and it's going to be a lot of struggle, but eventually it will even out, and you'll have real good product on the market, or at least you'll have the access to get that product on the market, and
it's encouraging. As a last point, I wanted to know, from the time you've spent in Southern Africa so far, what do you, and there are many articles that speak about Africa's competitive advantage in the industry. What do you think Africa brings to the global cannabis industry? Obviously we know what the competitive advantage is, whether it's land, water, sunshine, but what are maybe the unique contributions that Africa can bring to the cannabis industry? Is it maybe the unique strains that we have? Is it, maybe from a medicinal point of view, are maybe our strains very good for particular ailments? What are your views on that?
I think like Africa in general offers a lot of potential outside, what everybody normally thinks of, as well as like the strain value. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of value in the different cannabinoids that are being found down here, and there needs to be a lot more testing, unlike the landrace strains, to understand them better. I think that we need to open up research on all fronts, whether it be in Africa, Europe, North America, anywhere, just so we have a better understanding of how the genome and the plant works. Because trying to bring American plants to South Africa didn't work for a lot of people, just because they're not used to it, right? How they're made up, it just doesn't work. So I think understanding the plants that are already here, protecting those plants, as well as like cultivating them in the proper way to make them a better full spectrum medicine. I think another aspect that Africa brings is the fact that a lot of the cannabis has been used medicinally for thousands of years. And a lot of that hasn't really changed. And because of like, I think the last study I read, something like, it was like 60 or 70%, I believe, of Africa like relies on traditional plant medicine, you know? So if there was just a little bit more education, understanding, especially around cannabis and like where maybe the cannabis was sourced, I think you have the ability to not only improve a lot of people's lives on many levels by just going like, oh, hey, you kind of already do this, just grow this strain now. And now you have something that's high in THCV or high in CBD or maybe a CBD strain plant, right? I think, and then that could be easily, like if you're given the right support, you know, that has the potential to go a lot of places. That traditional aspect is really big because it provides, not to say that you're testing on everybody, but I think because people are so used to taking things without the normal quality control, you have people in Europe and America kind of doing that, but down here it's like, no, you trust your caregiver because it's like, oh, that, like, you know, you've trusted them forever. So I think that kind of informal relationship actually allows for more experimentation as well as more of like sussing out what people actually need. Because the problem is we have basic research, but we don't have realistic research. We have papers on 20 milligrams of purified CBD being given to children and adults. We have full spectrum oil like research, but we don't really have research around, hey, me and you smoking cannabis, you know, next to each other, and like what the actual like effects and how much we're absorbing. It's different, right? Because cannabis is such a changeable plant, an adaptable plant, right? And so getting people to understand the fundamentals around this, and then for it in order to be made into a proper medicine, because that's where the future I think goes. I think when you look at the pharmaceutical level, you see the compounding of different cannabinoids and terpenes to create different effects, as well as nootropics and other ingredients. But I think like that, you know, well, South Africa offers, or Africa in general offers the ability to produce a lot of cannabinoids for extraction and then composition to other medicines, I think. And I think a lot of people are really kind of like overblown, or they get the idea that, you know, Europe is the market everyone wants to go for. But I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think that's feasible, especially when you look at how the Europeans are doing their own cultivation aspects in Germany, Portugal, and Spain and other places. I think Africa should focus on Africa, and then maybe South America as well as the Asian markets, right? Because when it comes to EU good manufacturing practices, those are very costly and hard to do, and it's very hard to sell your cannabis within that market. Some countries don't actually qualify for the UN export quota because they do not have the infrastructure to do it, right? So some countries are really already capped from the beginning. But here's the thing, that doesn't mean they can't produce a medicine or legalize on their own and then sell it to some other country. That's really where a lot of this comes into. A lot of people need to be looking at the trans-African trade. People need to be looking at the single patient trade. Like Brazil has a market basically where it's like you cannot import bulk cannabis, but each individual patient has to be given the cannabis. I mean, imagine having somebody in Southern Africa like compound their medicine for them and then having a logistic company take it straight to them, right? You could do that on a craft and a micro scale. Like imagine being able to buy from a specific community even eventually. Like, you know, in the future of cannabis, I mean, you'll have your Walmarts, you'll have your Targets, you'll have your Peps. I mean, it'll be there, don't worry. But at the same time, like the people that actually grow it and love it and care about it, they'll still be there. Because even in the regulated markets, the craft side is still there. People are still willing and wanting to pay extra money to get stuff that has a specialty to it. So I definitely, that's my thoughts on it.
Now, I think there's a lot to look forward to, and you know, hopefully we can have another interview in a couple of months and just, you know, maybe reflect on, okay, it's February 2021 now, and as we've seen, there are constantly changes in regulations and reforms and so on. So maybe in a few months when we have a catch up, some of the things that we've just spoken about will either be implemented or at least, you know, maybe being discussed more broadly and widely. And again, hopefully I hope these are some of the things that policymakers are taking into consideration. And I hope that they are, as you've said, the Swaziland government has been engaging with you. So it is encouraging to know that they are speaking to experts that know about the industry, and that experts such as yourself, who has had the benefit of practicing what you do globally. I really appreciate the fact that you are also assisting the locals that already have, some of the skills that we've talked about, but maybe to refine those skills and to, come into the cannabis industry. And hopefully, the laws will continue to facilitate that. Thanks again, Jordan, for your time, and keep well. And I will be sharing your details at the end of the video so that, other people that have further questions and want to engage with you can get in touch. Thanks.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Have a good day.